There is something deeply wrong when the body becomes sick, even before the soul realizes it has lost its joy. Many people pray, go to church, read the Bible, yet they live tired, discouraged, and without hope. And they don't understand why sickness appears so easily. But what if the problem isn't only physical? What if the absence of joy, praise, and hope is silently opening the door to illness? Ellen White wrote about this more than a century ago. The Bible speaks about it repeatedly. And today, science is beginning to confirm what faith has always taught. There is an invisible spiritual protection that many have abandoned, and with it, they have lost strength, peace, and even health. Before we continue, take part in this moment. Write in the comments, "Lord, restore my joy." Subscribe to the channel because these messages work like a continuous worship experience for those who want to live with more faith, clarity, and hope in these last days. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear explains why so many people are sick without ever realizing the real cause. In the last days, the enemy rarely begins by attacking the body. He starts with the mind, slowly, almost unnoticed. First, joy is taken away. Then, hope is weakened. Finally, praise becomes silent. When this happens, a person may still function, still attend church, still pray, but inside, something is already breaking down. Ellen White clearly warned that the mind has direct control over the body. In the Ministry of Healing, she writes that discouragement, sadness, and lack of hope tend to cause disease. The Ministry of Healing, chapter Mind Cure. This is not spiritual poetry. It is a real principle of life. When the soul carries constant emotional weight, the body responds. The nervous system weakens, immunity drops, sleep becomes irregular, and the body stays in a constant state of stress. The Bible had already revealed this truth long before. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones." Notice that Scripture does not say a joyful heart might help. It says it works like medicine. And the broken spirit doesn't just make someone sad, it dries the bones. That is exactly how many people are living today, dry on the inside. No songs in the home, no gratitude in daily life, no expectation for tomorrow. This doesn't happen overnight. It starts when someone wakes up already overwhelmed by bad news, when prayer before sleep is neglected, when singing disappears, when praise is replaced by constant worry. Ellen White also wrote that the religion of Christ never degrades the body, but instead brings balance, self-control, and strength, the ministry of healing. So when faith loses its joy, something is out of alignment. The enemy knows he doesn't need a great sin to destroy a soul. All he needs is to extinguish hope, and when hope is gone, the body feels it first. But there is something many have forgotten, and this is where protection begins to return. When the Bible speaks about joy, it never presents it as something shallow or dependent on circumstances. In Scripture, joy is a spiritual state of trust, and that trust works like an invisible shield. That is why the Bible never separates joy from health or faith from emotional balance. A joyful heart is not just a positive feeling. It is an inner environment where God can work freely. In Nehemiah 8:10, the people were exhausted, emotionally broken, and aware of their failures. And in that moment of weakness came an unexpected declaration. "Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Notice the depth of that statement. The joy of the Lord is not only comfort, it is strength. And where there is spiritual strength, there is endurance. Scripture repeatedly shows that discouragement opens doors, not only spiritual doors but physical ones as well. The psalmist writes, "Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you disquieted within me?" Hope in God. Psalm 42:11. Here, the downcast soul is called to rise through hope, not through changing circumstances. This principle appears throughout biblical history. David faced persecution, loss, guilt, and fear, yet he never allowed praise to disappear completely. Even in caves he sang, even wounded he wrote psalms. It was not just religious routine, it was spiritual survival. When Paul and Silas were unjustly beaten and thrown into prison, The Bible records something that challenges human logic. But at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, Acts 16:25. They did not sing after they were delivered. They sang before. Joy expressed through praise did not only change the spiritual atmosphere, it affected the physical one. Chains were loosened, bodies endured, and minds stayed firm. The Bible consistently teaches that joy sustained by faith creates a space where despair cannot remain for long. And when joy disappears, something begins to weaken, even if outward life continues as normal. That is why Scripture never says, ignore your pain, but rather, do not let pain silence your hope. And when that hope is nurtured, it begins to protect more than just the soul. Ellen White was remarkably clear in stating that many illnesses do not begin in the body, but in a person's inner condition. She wrote at a time when emotional health, stress, and mental well-being were barely discussed, yet she described with precision what daily life now confirms. In The Ministry of Healing, she states, a large share of the diseases that afflict humanity have their origin in the mind. The Ministry of Healing, chapter Mind Cure. This statement is not harsh, it is freeing. It does not blame the sick, it reveals the path to restoration. Ellen White explains that emotions such as prolonged sadness, constant fear, unresolved guilt, and loss of hope weaken the nervous system, disrupt the body, and reduce its ability to recover. The body begins to carry a burden it was never designed to carry alone. She also writes, grief, anxiety, discontent, remorse, guilt, distrust, all tend to break down the life forces and invite disease. The Ministry of Healing. Notice the word she uses, invite. Disease does not force its way in, it enters when the inner environment becomes welcoming. On the other hand, Ellen White affirms with equal clarity that joy, hope, and trust in God strengthen the body, promoting balance and endurance. She teaches that faith does not work only for the salvation of the soul, but for the harmonious functioning of the whole being. In another passage, she echoes Scripture by stating that a cheerful heart is a good medicine, reinforcing that spiritual and physical health cannot be separated without loss. The Ministry of Healing. This explains why two people can face the same illness, the same environment, the same treatment, and respond in completely different ways. The difference is not only in the medicine, but in the spirit. When faith becomes a burden, when religion turns into obligation, when praise disappears from daily life, something essential is lost. Ellen White never presented the religion of Christ as emotional weight, but as a source of relief, order, and renewal. She wrote that the religion of Christ brings joy, peace, and contentment, and that these elements act as restoring agents in both mind and body. The Ministry of Healing. So when someone lives constantly discouraged, without hope, without praise, it is a sign that something precious has been left behind, not only spiritually but in caring for oneself. And this loss almost always begins quietly. When praise disappears from daily life, something subtle happens. The inner atmosphere becomes heavy, even if no one notices right away. Silence without prayer is not neutral. It slowly shapes thoughts, emotions, and eventually the body itself. Ellen White deeply understood this principle. She wrote that music is a powerful means of uplifting the thoughts and driving away sadness, a tool given by God to strengthen faith and restore the mind. Education, chapter Moral Culture. She did not speak of music as entertainment, but as spiritual ministry. For her, singing was a way to align the heart with heaven. In another counsel, she states that songs of praise are a safeguard against discouragement and temptation, and that homes where praise is cultivated experience greater peace and unity, the Adventist home. This explains why, throughout the Bible, God's people sing at the most unexpected moments. Jehoshaphat placed singers at the front of the army. David calmed a troubled king through music and song. The Psalms were largely written as sung prayers to sustain the soul in difficult days. Singing works beyond words. It regulates breathing, it organizes thoughts, it reduces physical tension, and spiritually, it reminds the soul who is in control. Ellen White counsels that morning and evening, families should gather to pray and sing, because this creates an atmosphere of trust and spiritual protection in the home, the Adventist home. This is not just devotion, it is preventive care. When someone sings, even without feeling like it, something begins to shift inside. The mind slows down. Focus moves away from the problem. The body responds. That is why the enemy works so hard to replace praise with noise, distraction, and exhaustion. Because where there is singing, there is resistance. Many say, "I don't have a good voice," or "I don't feel like it." But Ellen White never tied praise to perfection, only to surrender. Singing does not require talent. It requires sincerity. And when it returns to daily life, hope begins to reappear, quietly, gently. When hope is lost, the body feels it before the mind can even explain it. A person keeps breathing, walking, working, but something inside quietly begins to weaken. The Bible never treats hope as a minor emotion. It presents it as vital strength. Proverbs 13:12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick." The language is direct. When hope is constantly delayed, frustrated, or abandoned, the heart, the center of life, begins to suffer. Ellen White reinforces this principle by explaining that the loss of hope weakens the life forces, while trust in God revives the whole being. In the ministry of healing, she teaches that hope acts as a restoring stimulus, while despair reduces the body's ability to recover. She writes that hope is a powerful aid in the treatment of disease because it awakens restorative forces God placed in the body at creation, the ministry of healing. This explains why people who maintain hope, even in pain, often endure illness with greater resilience, not because they deny reality, but because they refuse to hand control over to fear. Scripture calls hope an anchor. Hebrews 6:19 says, "This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast." An anchor does not remove the storm, but it keeps the ship from drifting. When hope is alive, the body finds stability. Sleep improves. Breathing becomes calmer. The mind slows down. Ellen White teaches that calm trust in God promotes health, while constant expectation of the worst prepares the way for disease, the ministry of healing. The body was not designed to live in continuous threat mode. Today, many people unknowingly feed thoughts of defeat. "I won't get better. It's too late. My body can't recover." These thoughts may seem harmless, but they shape the inner environment. Hope rarely disappears all at once. It is slowly suffocated. That is why God not only promises healing, He preserves hope as part of the treatment. And when hope returns, even fragile, something inside begins to realign. For many years, saying that emotions affect the body seemed purely spiritual or intuitive. Today, it is a practical observation. Modern science confirms exactly what Ellen White described with simple pastoral language. The emotional state directly influences the body's systems. Current research shows that emotions like joy, gratitude, and hope reduce stress levels, balance hormones, and strengthen the immune system. Prolonged emotions such as fear, sadness, and discouragement, on the other hand, keep the body in constant alert, weakening its natural defenses. Ellen White wrote something remarkably aligned with this when she stated that the mind has a controlling power over the body and that continuous negative thoughts undermine health, the ministry of healing. Doctors today explain that the body does not distinguish between real danger and imagined danger. When the mind lives in constant worry, the body reacts as if it were always under threat. This helps explain why people who live without hope fall ill more easily, experience more pain, and recover more slowly, even when following similar treatments. Another widely studied factor is the impact of music. Singing regulates breathing, reduces muscle tension, and calms heart rate. These effects are observable and measurable. Ellen White already encouraged the use of singing as a tool for emotional and spiritual balance, stating that praise drives away sadness and strengthens the mind. Education. Science simply added data to what faith has always practiced. Likewise, studies show that people who cultivate hope cope better with chronic illness, experience less anxiety, and maintain greater emotional stability. Not because they deny pain, but because the body responds better when the mind is not ruled by fear. Ellen White taught that calm trust in God brings rest to the nervous system, something now described as emotional regulation and stress reduction, the ministry of healing. This does not replace faith with science. It reveals that God designed the body to respond to what He Himself commanded: joy, praise, and hope. When these elements are present, the body cooperates with life. When they are absent, it struggles alone. And that brings us to something deeply personal. Over the years, many testimonies have shown that transformation often did not begin with a new medicine, but with a quiet inner shift. It was not an instant cure or something dramatic. It was a gradual return to joy, praise, and hope. Some people carried constant pain, insomnia, anxiety, and a deep fatigue that no test could explain. They prayed, but without expectation. They believed, but without joy. They trusted God, but with fear. When they began to change small spiritual habits, something different happened. Some decided to sing when they woke up, even without feeling like it. Others began to speak gratitude out loud before going to sleep. Some replaced constant complaining with slowly reading a psalm. None of this seemed impressive, but the body began to respond. Ellen White observed this many times. She wrote that gratitude and praise open the heart to God's restoring power, while constant complaining closes the mind to hope, the ministry of healing. In many cases, the pain did not disappear right away, but the person was no longer controlled by it. Sleep improved. Breathing became deeper. Fear lost its grip. Scripture records something similar when Jesus asked the paralyzed man, "Do you want to be made well?" John 5:6. The question was not about physical ability, but inner willingness. Healing begins when the spirit chooses not to surrender to discouragement. Ellen White wrote that many remain sick because the mind is bound by discouragement, and that freedom begins when a person cooperates with God's principles of life and hope, the ministry of healing. These stories continue today. People who, even with limitations, recover peace, who go through treatment with greater calm, who stop living as victims and begin living with trust, not because they deny reality, but because they choose to feed the spirit with light. A change of spirit does not remove every struggle, but it changes how the body moves through each one. And that prepares the way for a simple, daily practical decision. Everything we have seen points to one simple and profound truth. Joy, singing, and hope are not only spiritual virtues, they are practices that preserve life. Ellen White never presented these principles as optional. She treated them as part of God's design to sustain human beings in a world marked by anxiety, exhaustion, and pain. In the ministry of healing, she wrote that we should not allow the mind to dwell constantly on what saddens and depresses, because this weakens both body and spirit. In contrast, she explains that thoughts of gratitude, trust, and praise cooperate with the restoring forces of life. This means daily spirituality goes far beyond church services or formal prayer moments. It is built through small habits practiced faithfully, singing a simple hymn when waking up, expressing gratitude before sleep, reading a psalm out loud when the mind feels restless, choosing words of hope instead of statements of defeat. These choices may seem small, but they shape the inner environment where the body lives. Scripture invites this kind of continual practice when it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always," Philippians 4:4, and then adds, "And the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds," Philippians 4:7. Guarding the heart and mind is protection. It is prevention. It is whole-person care. Ellen White teaches that true religion brings peace, joy, and trust, and that these elements not only prepare the soul for heaven, but make present life more balanced and healthy, the ministry of healing. In the last days, as the world grows heavier and news more distressing, this call becomes even more urgent. This is not the time to live spiritually discouraged, not the time to silence praise, not the time to abandon hope. There is still time to realign the inner life. There is still time to cooperate with God's plan for life. And that decision begins today, quietly, practically, faithfully. If this message spoke to your heart, turn this moment into a spiritual act. Write a simple prayer in the comments, as if you were standing before God right now. Lord, restore my joy, strengthen my hope, and teach me to praise you again. Share this video with someone who feels discouraged or is facing illness, so that light can reach another home. Stay connected with this channel. because in the next video we will talk about simple spiritual habits that strengthen the mind before sleep, something Ellen White considered essential for whole-person health. May the joy of the Lord be your strength, may praise return to your home, and may hope sustain not only your faith but also your body every single day.